Thank you so much for joining us on Impact 103. I mentioned an interview that I was going to be having and am now having with Philip Rosenthal from Christian View Network. Philip, great to have you back on the Morning Drive. And thank you so much for your time as you discuss and explain once again to us, what does the hate speech bill mean? What are the implications? I know that there was a deadline that has now been extended. We're going to be talking about that deadline. But I think for those that have heard this hate speech bill, haven't really tuned into Impact 103 over the last couple of weeks, as yesterday, rather on Friday, I had an interview with Michael Swain from 4SA explaining what this means. And yourself, this is the second time on the Morning Drive where you are chatting to us and saying what this is all about. And some people, they've heard about this but haven't really paid much attention. Why are we honing in on the importance of bringing awareness to the hate speech bill? And I think if you could just give us just a bit of an overview why it is flawed and why we need to be opposing the hate speech bill, because we know that it has gone through phase 1 at National Assembly, but now it is in phase 2, which is the NCOP, which is the last stage before this bill could potentially become law.
Yeah, I think this bill is incredibly dangerous. And one of the reasons is just comes from the name. It claims that it's something to outlaw hate speech, and it's putting a penalty of up to 8 years in jail for that. And we could understand having a penalty for hate speech if, for example, somebody is inciting violence. But the way that this law is phrased, it doesn't just ban inciting violence or hatred. It's bans some very vague things that it calls social harm or psychological harm. Now, that basically means that anybody who says that your viewpoint is socially harmful, which could be another word for politically incorrect, or might cause somebody upset, which would be psychological harm, could then bring a criminal charge and have you put in jail if that particular magistrate happens to agree with that. And we've had some very arbitrary decisions from the courts recently on this hate speech issue, and it seems as if it's very difficult for anybody to be entirely objective, because we all get offended by what other people have to say. We've had some cases, for example, where the flying of the old South African flag was declared to be hate speech. Personally, I don't have any interest in flying that flag, but I can't see that that is hate speech. Somebody might be offended by it, but it's not going to incite anybody to harm anybody else. Just on Friday, we had a ruling by a magistrate who ruled that a political leader who was calling for the killing of white people was not hate speech, because somehow his views were deemed to be not literal. And that, I can't see that from the context that was not literal. That was exactly what he was saying, but that was not considered to be hate speech. So this is very dangerous when you have just the bias of a judge that can decide what is hate speech and what is not hate speech. And when the bill is so vague in the way that it's worded, it can then allow anybody's political viewpoint to interpret what is socially harmful or not socially harmful. Now, that brings a danger for the gospel, and this bill claims to have exceptions for religious speech, for media speech, for academic and such like. But the way that exemption clause is phrased is actually also just as misleading, because it only protects against the actual impact of the words spoken. It doesn't protect against the impact of you inciting somebody else to do something, which is fine if you're trying to stop somebody from inciting violence. But in this case, if you were motivating for a political cause or a religious cause that somebody else deemed to be socially harmful, then you would not be protected. So we've proposed a whole list of alternative changes to word this bill. Preferably, we would like to scrap it, but the second prize is to make some changes that would make it very clear what is hate speech and what is not hate speech. But the National Assembly did not agree to that. So we've really got to speak up to try and stop this from happening. And the submissions are called for by the 22nd of May.
Philip, is it really necessary to have the hate speech bill? Are there no other laws and acts in place that assists in this area of our Constitution?
Well, there's many laws that deal with the same problems. And really, in my view, this is double legislation. We don't need this at all. So, for example, we got the Riotous Assemblies Act. If you are inciting people to take place in a riot, then you can be criminalized for that. There's a thing in the common law called criminal injuria, which is if you really harshly insult somebody, they can take that to the police. And there's good precedent on that. There's the Incitement Act. These things are much more narrowly defined. They deal with real problems like people inciting violence. This kind of situation, what has commonly happened overseas is that, for example, people have an argument about a restaurant bill or a parking ticket or something, and then suddenly this becomes a criminal issue. We've got cases where recently in the United Kingdom, a feminist activist was arrested for saying that a woman is a biological female because that was deemed to be offending the trans activists. We've got an evangelist in Canada who was arrested for trying to convert homosexuals. And we've already had serious problems in South Africa. For example, Simeon Chetty in Durban, who was an evangelist who was preaching, trying to convert Hindus to the Christian faith. And he said that Jesus was greater than the Hindu god Krishna. And then he got a civil lawsuit where claiming 1 million rands damages from some Hindu activist group who alleged that he was saying that Christians were superior to Hindus. Now, he didn't say that. He said Jesus was superior to the Hindu god Krishna, which is not the same as Christians are superior to Hindus, but it was interpreted that way. And thankfully, that was resolved out of court. But you can imagine how much more serious it would be if he was then threatened with 8 years in jail. And this is the type of nonsense that people in Russia and China and Saudi Arabia have to be afraid of. Even as on our northern border, Zimbabwe, you have to be very careful what you say. And you cannot have proper religious freedom or political freedom if you have got those fears and constraints that you might be arrested for something that you say.
Philip, where does freedom of speech come in if this bill were to go into law? Is there a contradiction over there?
Well, I think that what they're doing is a little bit like a card conjurer who kind of tricks you so that you lose track of which card is the one that he put into the pack. Because they talk about freedom of speech and assure everybody they're going to be protecting it. But the way that this law is phrased means that they can send innocent people to jail, including innocent Christians to jail. And no, this is really a serious infringement of freedom of speech. And we also have to remember that freedom of speech has only existed in our civilization for a few hundred years, and just in a small number of countries. It's not something which is going to happen naturally. We have to actively protect it as something that we treasure and value, and have some tolerance of other people's whose views are offensive, because we see the greater good in the principle. But I think that the difficulty is that we've got a new generation of politicians who have not experienced being silenced, as were the previous generation, and so they don't understand how harmful that is when you cannot speak up against something that you don't agree with. And it's a way that we correct things that are wrong in society by speaking up. But now the government would like to kind of become a parent to everybody and decide what people are allowed to say and what they're not allowed to say.
Philippa, there was a deadline last week. The bill was going to be closed for comments and suggestions or opposition or whatever it may be. That deadline has now been extended. What is the date of the new deadline that we need to get our comments and whatever we suggest or our voice being heard while we can? And what is that deadline for us to get that through to the NCOP?
Okay, the new deadline is a Monday next week at 1:00. And if you go to our Facebook page, which would be facebook.com/Christian View Network, you can see the email address where you can write in. I think Dear South Africa, the website, has also got a template form that you can use to write in on. And I would really encourage you, as soon as you get to your computer or your phone, you finish driving, please go and just voice an objection. The public speaking up, even if it's not detailed, will help those of us who are putting in more detailed submissions so that the politicians know that there are many other people who do not support this. And in my view, we should really be calling this the censorship bill, although they are calling it the hate speech bill.
If you want to make sure that your voice is heard with this in regards to the hate speech bill, I encourage you to go to the various websites, the various links that were mentioned. Philip Rosenthal is from Christian View Network. Go to their Facebook page. Everything is there for them. Also, on a Friday, we mentioned that dearsouthafrica.co.za/hate crimes and hate speech NCOP link is available. I actually went onto there to go and have a look how it works out and what the formula and format is. And you just go and populate everything in that link, and it gets taken straight to where it needs to go. We also do have that website, that email address available for you. So if you want to get your voice heard, if you want to add to this and have your name like a signature put down against this passing of this bill into law before the 22nd of May, 1 p.m., send through a WhatsApp on the WhatsApp line 071-364-0376. Philip Rosenthal, thank you so much for your time this morning on The Morning Drive. It's great to have you once again.